Moana.
Mom's here. We're safe and we're well provided, and when we look to the future, there you are. And every chief that has ever been. And on that day when you add your stone, we'll raise this whole island higher.
If the lagoon is empty, what if we fish farther out, beyond the reef?
Sometimes we wish we were, and who we meant to be. Don't match up.
I can lead with pride, I can make us strong. I'll be satisfied if I play along. But the voice inside sings a different song. What is wrong with me? Grandma, if there's something you want to tell me, just tell me. There's something you want to tell me?
Some stories do not begin with a destination, they begin with a sound, a pull, a feeling that something beyond the edge of the familiar is calling your name. Welcome to the Cineflux, a place for those of us who believe cinema is not only something we watch, but something we carry. A place where a frame can feel like a memory, and even the simplest story can become a mirror if we sit with it long enough. Today, we return to an ocean many of us know, but as different people. The waves may look familiar, the horizon may feel remembered, yet the meaning of the journey has changed. Moana is the kind of story that invites this question immediately: what does it mean to hear a calling that no one else can hear for you? Not a command, not a promise, a calling, something quieter and more demanding. It asks you to leave the life prepared for you and move towards something uncertain, not because you are fearless, but because remaining still has begun to feel like another kind of fear. This essay is not simply about whether this new version of Moana succeeds as spectacle, adaptation, or entertainment. Those questions matter and we will reach them. But first, I want to spend time with what this story is trying to hold beneath its bright surfaces. The ocean, the songs, the mythology, the scale of the adventure, all of that is visible, what interests me more is the invisible thing moving beneath it all, the tension between inheritance and identity, between the life given to you and the life you discover is yours. Because here is the thing about this film, it arrives carrying memory before it creates a single new one. You do not enter it empty, you bring another version with you. You bring the first time you heard these melodies, the first time the horizon opened, the first time a young girl stood at the edge of her island and looked toward a world everyone around her had learned to fear. A remake this close to a beloved original is never watched alone. It is watched beside the ghost of what came before. And that creates a strange emotional experience. Part of you wants to surrender to the familiar, part of you wants to resist it. Part of you is waiting for the film to justify its existence, while another part simply wants to feel that old sense of movement again. This is where our conversation begins, not with certainty, but with that tension. What does a new version owe to the story people already love? Is faithfulness a virtue, or can it become a cage? When a film recreates wonder, does the wonder return, or do we become more aware of the machinery rebuilding it? Think about what that means for Moana in particular. This is already a story about listening to the past without becoming trapped by it. It is about honoring those who came before while still making a choice they could not make for you. So the existence of a new adaptation creates an almost perfect echo of the story itself. The film must inherit, the film must remember, but the film must also find a reason to move forward. What struck me most, before asking whether every choice works, is how emotionally complicated that task is. We often talk about remakes as if they are simple acts of repetition, but repetition is never simple when memory is involved. Memory edits, memory softens, memory turns moments into symbols. The earlier Moana has had time to become more than a film for many people. It has become childhood comfort, family courage, music played in rooms that no longer look the same. A new version is not only competing with images, it is competing with lives. That is why I want this essay to move slowly at first, not with hesitation but with attention. We are going to look at what this film understands, what it recreates, what it deepens, and where it loses the emotional clarity it is reaching for. We will talk about performance, visual language, sound, silence, mythology, and the difficult question of whether realism brings us closer to a story or places glass between us and it. We will talk about the moments that breathe and those that feel too carefully assembled. And through all of that, I want to keep returning to one thought. A journey is not meaningful simply because it takes us somewhere new. Sometimes its meaning comes from seeing the familiar with altered eyes. Maybe that is why ocean stories stay with us. The ocean never appears completely new, yet it is never the same twice. Every wave repeats a shape that immediately disappears. Every return contains a departure. Every horizon promises distance while reflecting the light already behind you. Moana has always understood that contradiction. Home is not the opposite of adventure. Identity is not the opposite of inheritance. To leave is not always to reject. Sometimes leaving is how you finally understand what you are carrying. So, wherever you are listening from, whatever memory you bring into this film, let us begin there. Not with the question of whether this version replaces anything. It cannot and it does not need to. Let us begin with a more honest question. What does this return reveal about the world that asked for it, the industry that shaped it, and the audience that was ready to sail back into the same story once again? Because before we can understand what Moana is doing on screen, we have to understand the moment that brought her back to the ocean. And the moment that brought Moana back was already crowded with questions. By the time this film arrived in theaters on July 10, 2026, the idea of turning a beloved animated story into live action was no longer a novelty. It had become one of the defining habits of modern studio filmmaking. Disney had spent years returning to familiar words, translating drawings into physical sets, digital creatures, real faces, and increasingly elaborate spectacle. Some of those returns had found enormous audiences, others had exposed a growing exhaustion with the formula. So Moana did not enter a neutral cultural landscape. It entered a conversation already asking whether recognition had become more valuable to Hollywood than discovery. That question felt sharper here because the original did not belong to a distant generation. The animated Moana was released in 2016. It was still present in family homes, still circulating through streaming, still carried by songs that had never really disappeared. It earned more than $690 million worldwide, received Academy Award nominations for animated feature and original song, and gradually became one of the most enduring films of Disney's modern era. Then Moana 2 arrived in 2024 and crossed $1 billion globally. Less than 2 years later, the live-action version followed. The ocean had barely settled before the studio asked people to sail across it again. Think about what that timing communicates. This was not a forgotten story being rescued from a world. It was an active franchise being multiplied in real time. Children encountering Catherine Lagaaya's Moana in 2026 could easily have watched the animated original the night before. Parents were not being asked to revisit a distant childhood memory. They were being asked to purchase a new version of something already available, already loved, and already visually complete. That is why the central challenge was never simply, can the story work with real performers? Of course it can. The deeper challenge was, what can physical reality reveal that animation could not? What emotional truth emerges when the ocean surrounds a real teenager, when woven fabric has weight, when a village is built by hands, and when cultural practices are embodied by people whose communities carry them beyond the film? Without a compelling answer, faithfulness risks feeling less like reverence and more like duplication. And yet, reducing the entire project to corporate repetition would miss something important. The live action production reportedly involved hundreds of Pacific Islander performers, artists, dancers, navigators, tattoo practitioners, builders, and craftspeople. Cultural knowledge shaped the construction of homes, clothing, movement, materials, and ritual detail. In that sense, the film's physicality created an opportunity that the animated version could not offer in the same way. Polynesian people were not only inspiring the world on screen but visibly inhabiting it, building it, and authoring its textures. This matters because representation is not an abstract achievement. It changes who is allowed to occupy the center of an image. It changes which faces are treated as universal, which bodies are permitted to carry myth, and which living traditions are seen not as decorative background but as knowledge. A giant studio production can still be commercial and culturally meaningful at the same time. Those truths do not cancel each other. They create the tension through which the film must be understood. Director Thomas Kyle approached the material as someone deeply connected to musical storytelling, known especially for his stage work on Hamilton and In the Heights. His stated belief was that real performers could create a different emotional scale, particularly in moments involving Moana's youth, her connection to the water, and the intimacy of her bond with Gramma Tala. Dwayne Johnson returned as Maui, while Katharin Lagaaya stepped into the central role, carrying the unusual burden of making an iconic character feel human without making her feel smaller. But the world receiving this film was not only debating representation and remakes, it was also renegotiating the meaning of theatrical spectacle. In 2026, cinemas were experiencing a stronger year, with the domestic market running ahead of 2025 and major releases once again creating the sense of a shared summer season. At the same time, family audiences were being divided among several large films, including Toy Story 5 and Minions and Monsters. Moana arrived as a major theatrical event, but it arrived into a marketplace where familiarity was everywhere and attention was finite. The opening response captured the contradictions surrounding the entire project. The film debuted at number 1 in North America, yet its opening was considered disappointing for a production reported to cost around $250 million. It earned approximately $43 million domestically and $95 million worldwide in its first weekend. That is a large amount of money in ordinary terms and a troubling amount in blockbuster mathematics. A film can fill thousands of seats and still be described as an underperformance because the scale of its investment demands something closer to a cultural takeover. Critics were largely unconvinced. The repeated concern was not that the film betrayed the original, but that it remained too close to it. That distinction is essential. Adaptations are often criticized for changing too much, yet Moana encountered the opposite problem. Fidelity itself became evidence against the film. Catherine Lagai's performance drew praise, and the craftsmanship was often acknowledged, but many reviews questioned what the new version added beyond physical scale. Audience reactions were warmer, reflected in an A-cinema score and stronger recommendations than the critical conversation suggested, so a gap emerged. Critics approached the film as an artistic object that needed to justify its repetition. Many audience members approached it as an experience, a chance to hear familiar songs, see familiar characters, and share the story with family on a large screen. Neither response is dishonest. They are simply measuring different things. A critic may ask whether the film transforms its source. A child may only ask whether the ocean feels magical. A long-time fan may notice every recreated composition. Someone meeting Moana for the first time may not experience repetition at all. This is what makes reception so difficult to flatten into a score. Numbers can tell us that the response was divided, but they cannot fully explain the emotional contrast each person brought into the theater. Some arrived wanting reinvention, some wanted preservation, some wanted to see Pacific Islander faces standing inside a global fantasy on the largest screen available, some simply wanted the songs. At this point, the film is too new to have an awards history or a genuine second life on streaming. Its theatrical story is still unfolding. There has been no time for nostalgia to soften its edges, no years of repeat viewing to reveal whether it becomes a family staple or a temporary extension of the franchise. We are encountering it before culture has decided what to do with it, and perhaps that uncertainty is the most honest lens available. Moana was born into a period when studios trusted known stories, audiences distrusted obvious repetition, cinemas needed events, streaming kept older films permanently accessible, and representation carried both genuine emotional importance and enormous commercial value. The film reflects all of those forces at once. It is an artistic work, a cultural showcase, a corporate strategy, a family musical, and a test of how much familiarity the modern audience still wants. Does it feel timeless? The story may. The film itself feels unmistakably of this moment. Beautiful, expensive, sincere, cautious, culturally attentive, and haunted by the question of why it needed to exist. That does not make the journey meaningless, but it means the journey begins with a burden the animated film never had to carry. Before this Moana can discover who she is, the film must convince us that it has an identity of its own. And to see whether it finds one, we have to leave the industry around it behind and finally look at the film standing in front of us. The film standing in front of us is Moana, Disney's 2026 live-action musical adventure, directed by Thomas Kail and built from the emotional architecture of the 2016 animated story. It runs for 1 hour and 55 minutes and is rated PG. Catherine Aya plays Moana, Dwayne Johnson returns as Maui, John Tui portrays Chief Tui, Frankie Adams plays Sena, and Rena Owen becomes Gramma Tala. Those are the facts of the production, but facts alone do not explain the atmosphere this version is trying to create. At its heart, this is still the story of a young woman who feels called toward a horizon her community has learned not to cross. Her island, Motunui, is warm, abundant, and shaped by tradition. It is a home filled with affection rather than a prison she simply needs to escape. That distinction matters. Moana does not leave because she hates where she comes from. She leaves because loving her people requires her to discover the part of their history that fear has buried. The world she inhabits exists somewhere between physical reality and remembered myth. The sand has texture. The boats carry weight. The wind moves through fabric and hair. Yet the ocean is not merely water, and nature is never empty scenery. It watches, responds, protects, challenges, and occasionally seems to possess a sense of humor. Gods and monsters share the same horizon as families and fishermen. The supernatural does not feel like an interruption. It feels like one of the languages through which this world understands itself. And then there is Maui, the demigod whose confidence is so large that it almost conceals the wound beneath it. Dwayne Johnson returns to a character he already shaped through voice, but live action changes the balance. His physical presence makes Maui's theatricality more immediate while making the vulnerable moments more exposed. Beside him, Laga Aya has the more difficult task. She must play someone remembered through animation without becoming an imitation of animated movement. Her Moana needs to feel determined, but not invincible, young, but never reduced to innocence, connected to legend, while remaining recognizably human. This is where Thomas Gale's background becomes important. His strongest instinct is not simply toward spectacle, but toward performance moving inside music. He understands that in a musical, a song should not pause the drama, it should reveal the point where ordinary speech is no longer enough. That idea suits Moana because so much of her journey depends on feelings she cannot initially explain. The music gives form to desire before she has the language to defend it. Gale also approaches community as an active dramatic force. Motunui is not just a collection of people waiting for the hero to depart. It is a network of obligations, rituals, work, affection, and inherited knowledge. Moana's choice matters because it affects all of those connections. The more alive the island feels, the more emotionally costly the ocean becomes. Genre can make the film sound simpler than it is. It is a family adventure, a musical, a fantasy, and a coming-of-age story. But beneath those categories, it is about the difference between leadership and obedience. It asks whether protecting a community always means preserving its current shape. It asks how fear can disguise itself as wisdom when repeated for generations. And it asks whether identity is handed down intact or completed through action. Spoiler free, should you watch it? Yes, but with the right expectation. Do not go because you expect the story to surprise you at every turn. Its course remains deliberately familiar. Go if you want to see what embodiment changes, how a real face carries uncertainty, how actual landscapes alter scale, and how familiar music feels when it moves through physical breadth and space. The production places Pacific Islander performers and cultural traditions at the center of its world, giving the adaptation a value that cannot be measured only by how much of the plot has changed. You may also need to accept that the film's strengths and limitations come from the same decision. Its loyalty to the animated version preserves what people love, but that loyalty can restrict discovery. Some scenes invite you to feel the old emotion again rather than offering a new path toward it. Whether that feels comforting or unnecessary may depend on your relationship with the original. For younger audiences meeting Moana through this version, none of that comparison may matter. They may simply see a girl looking at the sea and understand that the world is larger than the rules she has inherited. For others, the experience may be more layered. You are watching a new actor begin her journey while remembering another Moana taking the same first steps. The film asks you to hold both images without forcing one to erase the other. And perhaps that is the fairest way to enter it. Not as a replacement, not as a definitive version, as a performance of a story whose central idea remains powerful enough to survive a change in form. Because once the comparisons quiet down even briefly, one question remains. Does this particular Moana make us believe that the ocean is calling her? To answer that, we have to return to the beginning, not to the history of the franchise, but to the first feeling the film creates when the lights go down. When I first sat with this film, I expected the familiarity to reach me before anything else. I expected comparison to become the loudest voice in the room. Every image would be measured against another image. Every musical phrase would carry the memory of how it sounded before. Every character would arrive already surrounded by an older version of themselves. For the first few minutes, that is exactly what happened. I was not simply watching an island appear, I was noticing how the island had been rebuilt. I was looking at the water and asking what had changed. I was watching faces enter the frame and instinctively searching for the gestures, expressions, and rhythms I already knew. That is the strange barrier created by a story this familiar. The mind begins reviewing the adaptation before the heart has been given time to experience it. But gradually something quieter took over. The opening does not feel like an invitation to an entirely unknown world. It feels more like returning somewhere remembered and discovering that the air is different. Motunui is no longer composed of drawn lines and carefully shaped color. It has heat, density, distance, and physical labor. The structures seem built rather than imagined. The boats feel heavy enough to resist the water. The clothing moves with the bodies wearing it. Even the ground beneath the characters appears to insist upon its own reality. That physical weight changes the atmosphere immediately. Animation can create perfect movement. It can allow a wave to carve with emotional precision or a character's expression to shift beyond the limits of a human face. Live action cannot reproduce that freedom without revealing the effort involved. Instead, it offers resistance. Water pushes back, wind interrupts, sand slows a footstep. A body must occupy the same space as the environment rather than glide through a world designed entirely around it. At first, I was unsure whether that resistance helped the story. The animated film possesses a natural visual rhythm in which reality and myth seem to belong to the same breath. Here, the film must work harder to convince us that an ocean can think, that legends can move beside ordinary people, and that the boundary between the natural and supernatural is not fixed. The more realistic the island becomes, the more noticeable the fantasy can feel. And yet, the opening find is emotional footing, not through the scale of the world, but through Moana's attention to it. Catherine Laga Aya does not enter the story as someone already prepared to become a symbol. There is uncertainty in the way she watches, listens, and hesitates. Her curiosity is not presented as rebellion for its own sake. It feels closer to recognition, as if the ocean is awakening a part of her that has always existed but has never been given a name. That choice made the film feel gentler than I expected. There is a temptation in the art adaptations to announce importance immediately. The music rises, the camera expands. Every image seems determined to prove that the story has become bigger, but emotional scale does not always grow alongside visual scale. Sometimes the most persuasive moment is simply a face responding to something beyond the frame. The early scenes are strongest when the film remembers this. Moana's relationship with the ocean begins less like a heroic contract and more like a private understanding. She is not yet a voyager. She is a child sensing that the world is trying to communicate with her. The water is playful, but it also carries mystery. It offers affection without explanation. That unanswered connection becomes more important than any display of digital power because it gives the journey an emotional origin. You believe she will return to the water because the water represents the first place where she feels fully recognized. The atmosphere around her, however, is not hostile. This matters more in live action than it might appear. Her family is not constructed as a simple force of oppression. There is warmth in the village and meaning in the responsibilities waiting for her. The life planned for Moana is not empty. She could belong there. She could be loved there. She could become a capable leader there. That is precisely why her restlessness carries weight. Leaving a place that has given you nothing is escape. Leaving a place you love because something essential remains unfinished is transformation. What struck me most during this first encounter was how the film's emotional tension emerged from that distinction. Moana does not stand between happiness and misery. She stands between two forms of belonging. One is visible, inherited, and understood by everyone around her. The other exists beyond the reef where certainty ends. The film's opening wants us to feel the comfort of the island before asking us to understand the pull of the horizon. When it succeeds, the ocean does not seem attractive merely because it promises adventure. It becomes the physical shape of a question Moana cannot silence. Who might she become if she crosses the boundary everyone else has accepted? The music enters this tension carefully. Familiar melodies create immediate emotional recognition, but hearing them through a new performer changes the intimacy. A voice emerging from a real body carries breath, effort, and small imperfections. Those details make the songs feel less like declarations delivered from inside a perfect musical universe and more like thoughts becoming too large to remain internal. Still, I could not completely forget the earlier film. There were moments when recognition arrived so quickly that the new image struggled to form its own identity. Instead of wondering what would happen, I found myself wondering how it would be recreated. Instead of being carried entirely by the scene, I occasionally became aware of the added decision-making choices around the scene I already knew. That distance never disappeared completely. But neither did the sincerity. Here is what I keep returning to. The film does not initially win you through novelty. It wins you when it does through presence, through Laga Aya's stillness. through the lived texture of the community, through the simple emotional truth of a young person being loved deeply and still feeling called elsewhere. By the time Moana looks toward the horizon with a longing she cannot yet explain, comparison has not vanished, but it has become less important. The question is no longer whether the image matches the one in memory. The question is whether you can feel the distance between the person she has been told to become and the person waiting somewhere beyond the reef. And from that feeling, the story finally begins to move. The story begins with an act of theft so ancient that its consequences have become part of the weather. Maui, a demigod who wants humanity to love him, takes the heart of Te Fiti, the source of creation. He believes he is giving people a gift. Instead, he breaks a balance he does not fully understand. The islands begin to lose their life and the heart disappears into the ocean while Maui is separated from the magical hook that gives him his power. Generations later, no one on Motunui speaks of this as a living crisis. They experience it as distance, as an old fear embedded in the rule that no one should travel beyond the reef. Moana grows up inside that rule. Her connection to the ocean begins before she can understand what it asks of her. The water chooses her, protects her, and places the lost heart in her hands. But childhood wonder is quickly covered by responsibility. She is the daughter of Chief Tui, and her future has already been written in the rhythms of the village. She learns how to listen to disputes, organize work, care for resources, and stand where her people can see her. There is real dignity in this education. The film does not present leadership as a crown waiting to be tamed. It is attention. It is service. It is the willingness to carry worries that may never become your own. That is why Moana's desire to cross the reef never feels like simple ambitions. She is not choosing adventure over duty. She senses that duty itself may require adventure. The island begins to show signs of decay. Crops fail. Fish disappear from familiar waters. Solutions that once worked no longer work. Yet the community's first instinct is to remain within the boundaries that have always protected it. Chief Tui responds with the fear of someone who has already learned what the ocean can take. To Moana, the reef appears to be a door. To him, it is the edge of a wound. Their conflict is powerful because both of them believe they are protecting Motunui. Moana wants to move because she sees change approaching. Her father wants her to remain because he remembers loss. Neither position comes from selfishness, and that prevents the story from becoming a simple argument between courage and cowardice. Fear can contain love, tradition can contain trauma. Iron may survive long after people have forgotten the pain that created it. Gramma Tala is the person who helps Moana see beneath that rule. She does not force an identity upon her granddaughter. She recognizes the identity already trying to emerge. In Tala's presence, the story becomes less about rebellion and more about remembrance. She reveals that their ancestors were voyagers, people who did not merely survive the ocean but read it, trusted it, and built their sense of home through movement. The community's stillness is not its original nature, it is an interruption. This discovery alters everything. The boats hidden away are more than tools. They are evidence of a self the island has buried. Moana realizes that the pull she has felt all her life is not a rejection of her people. It is one of the deepest things she shares with them. Her longing is ancestral memory moving through a person too young to have been taught it. Then the film gives her departure an emotional cost. Tala's decline pushes the story away from possibility and into necessity. Moana does not leave in celebration. She leaves while belief is opening inside her. The island is still home. Her family is still behind her. She has no guarantee that the ocean will make her worthy simply because it chose her. She takes the heart, enters a boat, and crosses the reef carrying an impossible task: find Maui, persuade him to restore what he stole, and somehow return balance to a world much larger than her experience. The live action adaptation follows this familiar voyage closely, preserving the original story's central mission and major relationships. This is the point where the story stops being a dream about the horizon and becomes a confrontation with everything beyond it. The ocean that once behaved like a companion now feels vast, indifferent, and physically exhausting. Moana has inherited voyaging, but she has not inherited mastery. Her first attempts are messy. The boat rests her, weather overwhelms her, direction becomes guesswork. The film allows her courage to exist beside incompetence, which is essential. Courage without uncertainty is simply power. Moana has very little power. She continues anyway. When she finally reaches Maui, she does not find the heroic figure preserved in legend. She finds someone trapped inside his own performance. Maui fills space with confidence because silence might allow doubt to enter. He treats admiration as a kind of nourishment and other people as an audience he must keep under control. Moana approaches him with the urgency of a dying island. He initially responds as though she has arrived to confirm his greatness. Their conflict is comic, but beneath the humor lies a fundamental difference in how they understand responsibility. Moana believes being chosen creates an obligation. Maui believes his gifts should free him from one. He attempts to take the boat and abandon her, not because he is purely cruel, but because returning the heart would require him to face the failure that has defined centuries of his life. His arrogance is partly fear with a louder voice. The heart reminds him that his greatest attempt to earn love caused devastation. Moana is not merely asking him to complete a mission. She is asking him to revisit the moment his identity collapsed. The ocean repeatedly returns Moana to the boat, turning their partnership from a choice into a condition. Eventually, survival requires cooperation. Even Hehe, carried into the voyage almost by accident, becomes part of this emotional pattern. The bird contributes very little in any practical sense, yet his helpless presence keeps interrupting the grandeur of the mission. Moana is trying to save creation while also preventing one confused animal from disappearing over the side of the boat. That contrast gives the adventure warmth. Heroism is rarely experienced as a clean sequence of noble decisions. It is often responsibility arriving in ridiculous, inconvenient forms, asking to be protected anyway. Moana's instinct is always to preserve life, even when that life cannot understand what she is doing. Long before she restores the world, the film shows us the kind of leader she is becoming through the smallest creature entrusted to her. Their voyage develops through resistance rather than instant trust. Maui sees an inexperienced human who does not understand the scale of what she is attempting. Moana sees a legendary figure who has mistaken self-protection for freedom. The film becomes character-driven here, even when enormous creatures and magical objects occupy the screen. The external goal is clear, but the movement comes from the change in relationship between these two people. Each challenge strips away one of their assumptions. Their encounter with the Kakamora transforms the scene to a place of many danger. The sequence moves quickly, but it also forces Moana to act rather than simply insist that she belongs. She begins improvising, reading movement, and making decisions before confidence has time to arrive. Maui, meanwhile, begins to notice that her determination is not temporary. She is not a passenger waiting to be rescued. She is learning how to become useful inside chaos. The journey toward Tamatoa pushes them into a stranger kind of fit. The giant crab represents appetite without meaning, a creature who turns beauty into possession and treats the surface as the whole truth. Maui must recover his hook from this world of belittling distraction, but taking it back does not immediately restore him. His transformations fail. The object returns, yet the certainty attached to it does not. That failure exposes the wound beneath his legend. Maui's tattoos preserve the heroic version of his life, but his body also carries the child who was abandoned before he could decide what he was worth. His hunger for praise began as an attempt to answer a devastating question: why was he not enough to be kept? The feats, the stories, and the gifts to humanity become efforts to build a reason for people to want him. Moana does not excuse his selfishness, but she begins to understand its shape. This is where their partnership gains emotional weight. She stops treating Maui as a tool required to complete the mission. He stops treating her as a nuisance accidentally carried into his story. They begin to say what the other is afraid to say. Moana fears that the ocean selected the wrong person. Mani fears that without his powers, there is no person worth selecting at all. Their training scenes matter because wayfinding becomes more than navigation. Moana learns to read stars, wind, current, and the movement of the boat, but she is also learning a different relationship with uncertainty. At home, leadership meant having answers. At sea, leadership often means remaining attentive when answers are unavailable. She cannot control the ocean. She can only learn how to move with forces larger than herself. The pacing deliberately alternates between forward momentum and emotional pause. The action sequences keep the voyage alive, but the quieter stretches are where the characters change. The sea creates a space beyond social roles. There is no village to call Moana a future chief, and no crowd to call Maui a hero. Away from those identities, both must discover what remains. For a while, it seems that discovery may be enough. Moana becomes more stable, Maui becomes more generous. Their mission begins to feel possible not because the dangers have diminished, but because trust has replaced the need to prove themselves separately. He teaches her how to guide the boat. She reminds him that his sword did not begin with the hook. Each gives the other a language for something they could not reach alone. Then they approach the Fiti. The journey narrows toward the place where all of its emotion and questions must become action. Maui will have to face the consequences of his theft. Moana will have to discover whether being chosen means she can succeed. The heart glows in her hands, small against the scale of what stands before them. Taka rises between them and restoration, a force of fire, rage, and destruction. The plan fails. Maui's hook is damaged. The confidence they have built collapses under the reality of what the final crossing demands. For the first time, the mission no longer seems merely dangerous, it seems impossible. Maui sees the possible destruction of the one object through which he understands himself. Moana sees the possible destruction of everything she left home to save. They have reached the point where neither courage nor companionship can protect them from loss. And here is where the film shifts completely. To understand what this adaptation adds, it helps to stop looking at the images as replicas and begin looking at the hands behind them. The live action Moana was not developed around the belief that the animated film needed correction. Thomas Cale has spoken about trusting the original story and its characters while searching for what would change when they became flesh and blood. His guiding idea seems to have been that two real performers looking directly at each other can transfer an emotion that animation expresses differently. That approach explains why the production often preserves the original structure instead of radically rewriting it. Its experiment is not primarily narrative, it is physical and human. The first crucial decision was finding Moana herself. According to Disney, casting directors Bernard Desai and Tiffany Canfield conducted an extensive worldwide search involving thousands of young performers. Catherine Lagacé, then 17 and still attending school in Sydney, ultimately won the role and made her feature film debut. She was not chosen because she could recreate Oli Grawalho's performance exactly. Lagar Aya has said she understood that imitation would prevent the character from belonging to her. Cravalho, now an executive producer, also offered her guidance as she stepped into the part. That fact reshapes the way we watch Moana's uncertainty. Tlakae was not a seasoned star pretending to stand at the beginning of an unknown journey. In a very real sense, she was standing there herself. The scale of the production, the physical demands, and the cultural expectations surrounding the role were all larger than anything she had previously carried on screen. When her Moana appears unsure but continues forward, some of that vulnerability seems to belong to both performer and character. The discovery happening in the story is mirrored by the arrival of a new actor before an enormous global audience. Dwayne Johnson's casting involved the opposite challenge. He had already given Maui his voice, comic timing, and some of his cultural and personal resonance in the animated film. Returning in live action meant translating a character built through exaggerated movement into a physical performance without losing the energy people remembered. Cale recognized the unusual nature of watching one performer originate a role in animation and then embody it again with his entire body. That changes how Maui's confidence feels. In animation, his size can expand with the joke. In live action, Johnson must carry that size continuously. The performance becomes more exposed because there is nowhere for the vulnerable man to disappear when the demigod's posture begins to weaken. What once lived in a shifting, animated expression must now pass through breath, stillness, and the smallest hesitation in a real face. The third revealing fact is the scale of the Pacific Islander ensemble. Disney states that more than 200 actors from across the Pacific appear in the film. The collaboration extended beyond the principal cast to dancers, craftspeople, navigators, tattoo practitioners, and cultural experts whose knowledge shaped what appears on screen. This matters whenever Motunui fills the frame. The village does not feel inhabited by anonymous background performers positioned to create movement behind the stars. The gestures, dances, work, clothing, and physical relationships carry the presence of people drawing from living cultures. It makes Moana's responsibility easier to understand. She is not trying to save a symbolic crowd. The film surrounds her with faces, generations, skills, and patterns of communal life. The more specific the village becomes, the more meaningful her promise to return becomes. That specificity continued into the costumes. Tongan costume designer Liz McGregor reportedly searched museum collections in New Zealand and Samoa before overseeing more than 2,000 unique handcrafted garments. Moana's clothing incorporated handmade tapa with culturally meaningful designs, while the trim of her skirt was hand-woven specifically for this production. Maui's tea leaf garments were also created by Pacific artisans rather than treated as simple decorative pieces. Once you know this, clothing stops functioning as visual shorthand for an imagined island culture. It becomes evidence of time, research, labor, and knowledge. The fabrics do not merely tell us where the characters come from, they show that identity is constructed through practices passed from one pair of hands to another. When Moana carries her people into the ocean, she is literally wearing the work and memory of a community. The same philosophy guided the construction of Motunui. According to production details reported after release, the village's traditional feli were built without modern names. Thousands of yards of coconut fiber lashing were used, with Tongan master lasher Sopoli Malama Filipetoi contributing his expertise. Kyle reportedly placed Tohi in the film during a moment in which the craft is taught to Moana. That detail gives one of the quiet village scenes a completely different weight. What may initially seem like atmosphere is actually the preservation of knowledge happening within the frame. The film is not only showing us finished houses, it is showing how our culture remains alive through teaching. This echoes the entire story. Moana's identity is not discovered in isolation but assembled from skills and memories others entrust to her. Traditional Samoan tattoo expert Soa Peter Suluapi also advised the production and designed Maui's lower body tattoo. His participation reminds us that Maui's markings are not random fantasy decoration. They sit within a story influenced by Polynesian traditions in which the body can carry history, status, identity, and relationship. That makes Maui's animated tattoos more interesting as well. His body is already treated as an archive of his achievements. The involvement of a traditional practitioner strengthens the idea that history is not something Maui merely tells. It has been inscribed upon him, making his inability to escape his past visually unavoidable. The production also filmed in Hawaii, allowing performers to work against real water, light, weather, and landscape. Kyle has emphasized that placing a natural teenager in the middle of the ocean creates a different emotional response from watching an animated figure occupy the same space. But reality created its own challenge. The filmmakers had to combine physical environments with a responsive ocean, transformation magic, mythical creatures, and impossible islands without allowing the digital elements to make the actors feel disconnected from the world. The film is most convincing when efforts support a performer's reaction rather than demand attention for themselves. The music followed a similarly careful path. Cale reunited with Lin-Manuel Miranda, while the established songs by Miranda, Opetaya Foy, and Mark Mancina remained central. Rather than inserting new numbers throughout simply to claim novelty, the team created along the way for the end credits performed by Laga Aya, Johnson, and Cravalho. Cale described the song as a bridge between the two monas, with the original voice passing something toward the new performer. It is a fitting image for the production itself. This film was made through a constant act of receiving and passing forward, one actor to another, animation to live action, inherited music to new voices, cultural knowledge to a global screen. Not every creative decision escapes the shadow of the original. But the craftsmanship reveals that the adaptation's most meaningful changes are often found not in what happens, but in who is finally present to make it happen. And that presence becomes essential when we turn from the labor behind the film to the things the finished film genuinely achieves. What this film achieves most clearly is not reinvention. It is embodiment. That may sound like a modest accomplishment for a production built on such enormous scale, but embodiment is the reason its best moments work. The story is already known. The melodies already carry memories. The film cannot rely on discovery in the usual sense. Its task is to make familiar emotions pass through real bodies, real breath, and physical space until they feel immediate again. Catherine Lagarde is the center of that effort. Her performance does not try to compete with the elasticity or perfect clarity of animation. She gives Moana a more visible uncertainty. You can often see her forming courage rather than simply possessing it. Her strongest scenes are not the ones in which she appears most heroic. They are the moments before action, when fear crosses her face and is followed by a decision not to retreat. The scene that proves this most completely comes when Moana's confidence has been stripped away and she is left alone with the possibility that the ocean chose incorrectly. Laga Aina does not play the moment as a large collapse. She becomes smaller. Her voice loses certainty. Her posture changes. The space around her suddenly feels too large for one person to carry. And because the performance has allowed doubt to remain present throughout the journey, the breakdown does not feel inserted merely to create drama. It feels like the emotional debt of every brave choice finally demanding payment. Laga Aya was selected from thousands of candidates and was encouraged by original Moana performer and executive producer Olia Yeguala to make the role her own rather than imitate what came before. That freedom is visible in the quietness of her interpretation. Rena Owen's Gramma Tala provides the film with its deepest sense of emotional history. Her performance understands that Tala's wisdom is not solemn all the time. She's playful because she has stopped needing the village to approve of how she sees the world. That freedom makes her final moments with Moana more painful. The performance never treats Tala as a device whose only purpose is to deliver information and disappear. She feels like someone who has spent years protecting a truth until the right person was ready to receive it. Thomas Gill has specifically pointed to the farewell between Moana and Tala as an example of what live performance can change. He is right. The power does not come from realism automatically being superior to animation. It comes from watching two performers share the same air, each face responding to the other in real time. The camera can hold on grief before language organizes it. Dwayne Johnson's Maui works best when the performance stops trying to reproduce the speed of the animated character and allows his physical presence to become part of the psychology. Maui has built an identity that must occupy every room before anyone can question it. His gestures are large. His humor arrives quickly. He turns conversation into performance because performance gives him control. But the live action form also makes his insecurity easier to see. Everybody cannot transform as effortlessly as an animated one, and this becomes thematically useful. When Maui's powers fail, Johnson allows frustration to become embarrassment before it becomes anger. The hook is not simply a magical weapon, it is the object through which he has learned to believe he matters. The performance becomes most affecting when he looks less like a demigod losing power and more like an abandoned child losing the proof that he deserved to be loved. The writing succeeds whenever it allows Moana and Maui to challenge the stories they tell about themselves. Their relationship is not built on affection alone, it is built on interruption. Moana interrupts Maui's belief that value must be earned through applause. Maui interrupts Moana's belief that being chosen means she should already know what to do. Each character reveals the weakness inside the other's definition of strength. That is what makes the screenplay more than functional, even when its structure follows a path we recognize. The external journey has a simple objective, but the emotional journey keeps changing the meaning of that objective. Returning the heart begins as a task assigned to Moana. It becomes proof that she belongs at sea. Then it becomes a responsibility shared with Maui. Finally, it becomes something more difficult, a choice she must make without certainty, validation, or protection. The visual language is strongest when it stops trying to create an impressive postcard and begins using scale to express emotion. Wide ocean frames repeatedly place Moana against a world that appears capable of swallowing her without noticing. Yet the camera does not use her smallness only to make the danger seem larger. It makes her persistence visible. Every time the frame emphasizes how little space she occupies, the decision to continue gains weight. Motunui is photographed differently. The village is full of layered movement, warm human proximity, woven textures, and bodies working beside one another. The frame feels occupied. At sea, that density disappears. Moana has to create rhythm from emptiness. This contrast helps us feel why leaving is both necessary and painful. Home surrounds her with identity. The ocean removes every label and asks what remains. The film also understands the expressive power of faces. One of live action's most meaningful additions is the possibility of holding on a performer after the obvious emotion has passed. Kiel often allows a reaction to continue for a bit longer than the dialogue requires. In those brief extensions, certainty becomes doubt, humor becomes defense, and grief becomes resolve. The score carries the difficult burden of being instantly communicative. Familiar music can produce emotion before scene earns it, and the film occasionally depends too heavily on that stored affection. But at its best, the music is not used as a button pushed to summon nostalgia. It grows out of physical rhythm, paddles striking water, feet meeting earth, voices gathering inside community, and breath changing as a character moves from thought into song. The songs swap because they represent different forms of identity. Moana's music reaches outward. It searches. Moan's music announces itself and demands recognition. Tala's musical presence feels like memory moving between generations. The ensemble music of Motonui creates order through shared rhythm. These are not simply variations in melody. They are different ways of existing in the world. Sound becomes even more effective when the music withdraws. The ocean is rarely silent, but its sound changes with Moana's emotional state. At home, water can feel inviting and intimate. Far beyond the reef, it becomes heavy, repetitive, and indifferent. During danger, waves and wind reduce language to fragments. In moments of doubt, the space between sounds seems to widen. The film lets the environment speak without pretending that nature always offers comfort. The ocean itself is handled with similar intelligence when the film resists the urge to make every intervention cute or spectacular. Its personality is communicated through timing. A wave pauses. A current redirects the boat. Water withdraws at the exact moment Mana expects support. These gestures create a relationship rather than a convenient magical system. The ocean can choose her without completing the journey for her. In fact, one of the film's better ideas is that guidance does not remove responsibility. Moana may receive signs, but she must still interpret them, act on them, and live with the possibility of being wrong. The visual effects are most persuasive when they preserve that boundary, allowing the water to seem attentive without turning it into a human face, and silence carries what the songs cannot. The most moving pauses arrive when a character has exhausted the identity they normally perform. Maui becomes quiet when confidence can no longer protect him. Moana becomes quiet when determination stops feeling like evidence that she is right. Tala's absence creates a silence that remains present even after the music returns. This is what the film understands. Spectacle can show the size of a journey, but silence reveals its cost. Not every image achieves that balance. Not every familiar song discovers a new emotional shape. But when performance, framing, music, and stillness align, the adaptation briefly stops being a recreation. It becomes a story happening now inside people whose bodies can tire, tremble, hesitate, and still move forward. That is the last thing this film accomplishes. It does not make Moana stronger by removing her fear. It allows strength to emerge visibly from fear. And before we examine the places where that approach falls short, we need to listen more carefully to the moments in which the film says almost nothing at all. The film's quietest moments reveal something its largest sequences sometimes forget. Moana's journey is not powered only by action, it is powered by attention. She survives because she learns to notice. She notices the direction of the wind before she understands how to follow it. She notices fear behind her father's authority. She notices loneliness beneath Maui's confidence. She notices that the ocean is not simply carrying her somewhere, but waiting for her to become capable of recognizing where she must go. This is why silence matters so much in the story. Silence is not an absence of meaning, it is the space in which Moana begins to read what cannot be explained to her directly. Consider the way the camera stays with her when she looks beyond the reef. No one needs to tell us what she wants. The distance between her body and the horizon communicates it. Her face remains still, but her attention has already left the island. The world around her continues moving, people working, families speaking, daily life repeating while something inside her has become completely quiet. That quiet separates her from everyone without making her lonely. She is present, yet part of her is listening elsewhere. The ocean often speaks in this same visual language. It does not offer a clear explanation of why Moana has been chosen. It does not provide a map or guarantee that the journey will succeed. It moves around her, withdraws from her, redirects her, and occasionally leaves her alone with the decision. What the ocean refuses to explain becomes essential. Had it given Moana every answer, she would have remained a messenger completing someone else's design. By withholding certainty, it forces her to become a leader. She must interpret rather than obey. She must decide rather than follow. The film communicates this most powerfully when the water stops behaving like a playful companion. In those moments, the ocean becomes simply vast. There is no visible rush inside it. The camera holds Moana against open space, and suddenly her chosen status feels almost meaningless. She's still one person in a small boat surrounded by something that does not need her. That image carries more emotional weight than another spoken declaration of courage ever could. Maui's silence works differently. He is a character who uses sound to control perception. He tells stories, performs confidence, interrupts vulnerability with humor, and fills empty space before anyone can ask what might be hidden inside it. His loudness is a defense. It allows him to decide which version of himself the world is permitted to see. So, when Maui becomes quiet, the film changes. After his hook fails, there is a pause in which the mythology surrounding him seems to disappear. He is no longer the demigod from the songs or the figure preserved in tattoos. He is simply someone frightened that the object defining his world may be broken. The camera does not need to explain that fear, his stillness does it. The absence of performance reveals the person underneath. This is also why the tattoos moving across Maui's body are most meaningful when they stop entertaining us and begin confronting him. Mini Maui can express disappointment, caution, or compassion without spoken language. He becomes a visual conscience, the part of Maui that cannot be silenced by another joke. The idea is playful, but emotional function is serious. Moai carries an internal witness wherever he goes, even when no one else sees through the performance. Some part of him does. Gramma Tala belongs to silence in another way. She understands that guidance is not the same as control. She gives Moana knowledge, but she does not attempt to live the journey for her. Her presence creates permission. Her absence creates responsibility. After Tala is gone, the film does not need to remind us constantly of that loss. It appears in Moana's pauses. It exists whenever she looks toward the sea without the person who first understood why she was looking. Grief becomes an invisible companion aboard the boat. This is what the film chooses not to show in detail, the process by which loss becomes strength. There is no single moment where pain transforms neatly into wisdom. Mona simply continues carrying both. She misses Tala and moves forward. She doubts herself and keeps listening. The omission matters because grief rarely offers a visible turning point. It changes shape quietly, often while life requires us to do something else. The live action form gives these pauses a physical fragility. A performer can inhale before speaking, look away instead of answering, or allow an expression to disappear before another character notices it. These small moments create meanings that dialogue would flatten. Laga Aya is particularly effective when Moana's determination is not being announced. She lets uncertainty remain in the frame. Her eyes may settle on the heart before she reaches for it. Her body may hesitate before stepping toward danger. The choice becomes powerful because we see the moment in which she could choose differently. Courage appears in the space between hesitation and movement. Even the boat participates in this language. Its creaks, shifting ropes, and response to the water remind us that Moana is never moving through empty digital space. The vessel speaks through resistance. It tells her when she is forcing the journey rather than reading it. Wayfinding is therefore portrayed less as domination and more as listening. The navigator does not command the ocean. She notices patterns and enters into relationship with them. She understands that knowledge can be precise without becoming absolute. Stars, currents, wind, and birds offer information, but they do not remove uncertainty. That idea reaches beyond the adventure. Many of the most important choices in life arrive without a voice telling us we are correct. We move through fragments, a feeling we cannot ignore, a history only partially understood, the memory of someone who believed in us, and the quiet realization that remaining still has become impossible. Moana's silence contains all of that. The film may be filled with music, but its deepest truth lives between songs. It lives in the pause after confidence fades, the distance between home and horizon, the empty place left by someone who is gone, and the breath taken before a frightened person decides to continue. Cinema rarely does this well unless it trusts us to pay attention, and when Moana trusts silence, the story becomes larger than its spectacle. It becomes the experience of listening for a direction that cannot be spoken out loud. But silence alone cannot protect a familiar story from every weakness, and the very restraint that deepens some moments also exposes where the adaptation struggles to create a voice of its own. The film's greatest weakness is inseparable from its most obvious strength. It knows exactly why people love Moana, and that knowledge makes it afraid to move too far away from anything they remember. Faithfulness can be moving. A familiar melody can reopen an emotion immediately, and a recreated image can feel like recognition passing between generations. But when nearly every major beat arrives with the same purpose, structure, and emotional timing as before, recognition gradually replaces discovery. You stop asking what this version will do and begin waiting to see how it will reproduce what has already been done. That is more than a complaint about originality. It changes the way suspense, humor, and emotion function. The animated film built each moment for the first time. This adaptation often inherits the response those moments already earned. It knows that a certain image is beloved, so it recreates the image. It knows that a song produces excitement, so it protects the song. It knows where laughter once arrived, so it leaves space for laughter to return. But emotion cannot always be transferred simply by preserving its coordinates. This is why several critics describe the film as faithful to a fault and question whether its visual transformation produced a meaningful artistic transformation. Even positive assessments tended to acknowledge that the adaptation remains unusually close to its source. The problem becomes especially visible in the pacing. The film moves through familiar events with confidence, but confidence is not the same as momentum. Because the media destinations are already fixed, some transitions feel less like one decision causing the next, and more like the production arriving at another scene it knows it must include. The journey remains entertaining, yet occasionally it feels curated rather than lived. This is particularly noticeable when a quiet emotional moment is followed too quickly by comedy or spectacle. The original could change tone with the speed and elasticity of animation. A face could stretch into humor, the environment could bend with a joke, and a musical rhythm could carry us rapidly from grief toward movement. Live action has more weight. A real expression of pain does not disappear as easily. A physically grounded environment cannot change emotional texture without some resistance. When the remake follows the earlier timing too precisely, the transitions can feel abrupt because the form requires more time than the structure allows. The realism also creates a visual contradiction. The film never completely resolves. Motunui benefits enormously from physical texture. The costumes, architecture, landscape, and communal movement made the island feel inhabited rather than designed. But the farther the story travels into fantasy, the more the film must combine those tangible elements with digital creatures, magical transformations, and an ocean possessing intention. Some of these effects are beautiful, others feel technically impressive without feeling fully present. The problem is not that they look artificial. Myth does not need to appear ordinary to be believable. The problem is that the performers sometimes seem to occupy one visual reality while the magical elements occupy another. When that separation becomes visible, the emotional relationship between character and environment weakens. You become aware of the construction when you should be feeling the danger, wonder, or absurdity. Mai suffers most from this tension. Dwayne Johnson brings energy and personal connection to the role, but the live action design cannot fully reproduce the impossible freedom that made the animated Maui so expressive. Its transformations are meant to feel spontaneous, like identity changing shape faster than thought. Here, each transformation carries visual weight and technical preparation. The joke can arrive a fraction later, and that fraction matters. Johnson is strongest when he is allowed to play Maui as a person. He is less convincing when the film asks his body to function as a recreation of animated exaggeration. At times, the performance appears caught between two demands: embody the emotional vulnerability of a real man while also matching the enormous theatrical energy of a figure designed without physical limits. The screenplay could have helped by giving this Maui more new material. There are opportunities to deepen his relationship with the people whose admiration he once pursued, to examine how centuries of isolation ordered him, or to explore how his legend differs across the communities that remember him. Instead, the film mostly relies on the emotional framework already available. His pain remains effective but rarely surprising. Moana encounters a similar limitation. Lagai gives her vulnerability warmth and an attentive stillness. Yet the adaptation does not always build enough new space around that interpretation. We can see a slightly different Moana emerging, but the screenplay frequently guides her back toward the same expressions, songs, and choices at the same points in the journey. The performance wants room to breathe. The film often gives it instructions. This does not make the character hollow, but it occasionally makes her emotional development feel preconfirmed. We already know what she will discover about herself, and the adaptation does not consistently complicate that discovery. A new scene involving her responsibilities as a future chief, a deeper disagreement with her parents, or a more sustained struggle with the meaning of being chosen could have made this journey belong more fully to this incarnation. The songs reveal the same divide. The performers sing with sincerity, and several numbers gain power from physical breath and collective movement, but some musical moments feel constrained by comparison. The new voices cannot simply exist. They are heard beside performances that have spent a decade becoming culturally familiar. When the arrangements remain close, small differences may feel like losses rather than interpretations. A bolder adaptation might have changed the musical language more substantially, not to improve the songs, but to give the performers a space in which memory was not always singing beside them. None of these flaws destroys the film. The craftsmanship remains visible. The cultural presence behind the production gives it genuine value, and Katrin Lagai frequently creates emotion where the adaptation itself offers little novelty. The audience response has also been warmer than the critical reaction, suggesting that many people find pleasure and meaning in the very familiarity critics resist. But the central wound is real. The film asks its cast, craftspeople, musicians, and cultural advisors to bring living human specificity to a structure preserved almost in glass. It creates a world full of texture, then too often walks through it using footprints that were already there, and that leaves us with a film whose purpose cannot be found entirely in what it changes. To understand why the story still carries power, we have to look beneath the form of the remake and ask what Moana has always been trying to tell us about identity, inheritance, fear, and the meaning of finding your own direction. At the deepest level, Moana is not a story about leaving home. It is a story about learning what home actually means. For most of the film, home appears to be a fixed place. Motunui, the island, the village, the people waiting behind the reef. It is the ground beneath Moana's feet and the future prepared for her. But the journey gradually reveals that home is not simply where you remain. It is the history you inherit, the responsibilities you accept, and the part of yourself you must understand before you can truly return. That is why the ocean matters. The ocean is not merely the distance between Moana and her goal. It represents uncertainty itself. It has no walls, no visible paths, and no permanent shape. On the island, every part of Moana's identity seems already named. She is a daughter, she is a future chief. She is responsible for preserving the life her community already knows. At sea, those names lose their authority. No one is there to confirm who she is. The ocean does not care about her title. It does not become calm because she is frightened or produce answers because she believes she deserves them. It removes the structures that made her identity feel secure and asks whether she can still choose a direction. This is what the film understands about growing up. Identity is not discovered only by looking inward, it is built through decisions made when certainty disappears. Moana is chosen by the ocean, but being chosen does not make her ready. That distinction is essential. Many stories treat destiny as proof of exceptional ability. The hero is selected because some hidden greatness has already been confirmed. Moana complicates that idea. The ocean gives her the heart, but it does not give her complete knowledge, mastery, or protection. She remains inexperienced. She makes mistakes. She needs instruction. She loses confidence. Being chosen becomes not a reward but a responsibility. Think about what that means. A calling does not always arrive because you are the strongest person available. Sometimes it arrives because you are willing to notice what everyone else has learned to ignore. Moana notices that the island is changing. She notices that the rules protecting her people are no longer enough. She notices that the fear surrounding the reef does not match the deeper history hidden beneath it. Her greatest gift is not fearlessness, it is attention. The film repeatedly contrasts attention with performance. Moana listens while Maui performs. She searches for meaning while he searches for approval. She moves toward responsibility while he initially moves away from consequence. Maui's story is therefore not separate from hers. It is a distorted reflection of it. He has spent centuries giving people what he believes will make them love him. He creates islands, raises the sky, controls the wind, and transforms himself into whatever the moment requires. His identity is built from usefulness. If people admire what he does, perhaps he will never have to ask whether they value who he is. The hook becomes the perfect symbol of this wound. It gives Maui power, but it also gives him a role. Without it, he cannot perform the version of himself that earns applause. When the hook is damaged, his fear is not only that he will lose magic, it is that he will lose the evidence that his life has value. Moana challenges this belief because she does not need Maui to remain impressive. She needs him to become responsible. That is more difficult. Admiration asks for another performance. Responsibility asks him to confront what his performance has concealed. This is why the heart of Te Fiti is such a powerful symbol. It is small, vulnerable, and easily lost, yet the entire world depends on its restoration. The film does not represent healing as the creation of something new. Healing means returning what was taken. Maui's original failure comes from treating creation as an object he can possess and redistribute. He takes the heart because he wants to give humanity something magnificent. The intention may appear generous, but the act is built on control. He decides that creation can be removed from its source without consequence. The world begins to decay because connection has been broken. That idea reaches far beyond fantasy. People often damage what they claim to love when they treat it as something to own, improve, extract, or display. A place becomes a resource, a tradition becomes a costume, a relationship becomes proof of worth. The film suggests that care begins when possession ends. Moana does not save the world by conquering nature. She succeeds by understanding what nature has lost. That is the difference between her and Maui at the beginning of the story. Maui approaches the world through power. Moana learns to approach it through relationship. Wayfinding expresses this philosophy beautifully. A navigator does not force the sea to obey. She studies stars, wind, waves, birds, and currents. She moves through knowledge, but the knowledge is relational. Every sign means something because it exists beside another sign. Direction is created through attention to connection. Leadership works the same way. At first, Moana imagines leadership as the ability to produce answers for her people. The voyage teaches her that leadership may instead mean staying present when answers are incomplete. She must listen to those who came before without surrendering her judgment to them. She must respect tradition while recognizing that tradition can become distorted by fear. The hidden boats make this idea visible. They represent a history that has not disappeared, only been silenced. Moana's ancestors were voyagers, yet the community now defines itself through stillness. Fear has interrupted memory so completely that caution appears to be identity. This is what inherited trauma can do. A painful event creates a rule, the rule survives. The original pain becomes less visible, but the behavior shaped by it remains. Eventually, people begin treating the rule not as a response to fear, but as proof of who they have always been. Chief Tui does not forbid the ocean because he lacks imagination. He does it because grief has taught him that control is love. The tragedy is that his protection begins to separate his people from the knowledge they need to survive. Moana does not defeat her father's fear by rejecting him. She carries his love with her while refusing to let his fear define the limits of her life. That is a more mature form of independence than simple rebellion. She can understand why someone is afraid and still choose not to inherit the Fair unchanged. Gramma Tala represents the opposite form of inheritance. She does not hand Moana a complete identity. She gives her access to memory. She opens a door and allows Moana to decide what to do with what lies behind it. That is why Tala's guidance feels so loving. She does not demand that Moana become a copy of the ancestors. She helps her understand that the desire she feels is not evidence that she is broken or disloyal. It belongs within a much larger story. Sometimes the most transformative thing another person can tell us is not what to do, but that the part of ourselves we fear does not make us alone. Here is what I keep returning to. Moana's journey does not end with her choosing the ocean over the island. She learns that the two were never opposites. The ocean is part of her people's identity. Voyaging is part of home. Movement is part of belonging. She does not need to abandon her community to become herself. She must expand the community's understanding of itself so that both can survive. This is why the story resonates so strongly with anyone who has ever felt divided between expectation and desire. Maybe your family prepared one future for you while another kept calling quietly. Maybe you were taught that loyalty means remaining unchanged. Maybe you have felt guilty for wanting something that no one around you could understand. Moana offers a gentler truth. Becoming yourself does not always require rejecting where you came from. Sometimes it allows you to return with something your home has forgotten. The film also understands that restoration is different from victory. A typical adventure might end with the hero defeating the monster blocking the way, but Moana's deepest insight is that destruction is not always the answer to destruction. Anger may be grief without recognition. Violence may be the shape loss takes when no one sees the wound beneath it. To restore balance, she must eventually look beyond the form of the threat and ask what happened to create it. That question changes the moral structure of the story. The world is not safe because Moana becomes stronger than everything standing against her. It is safe because she becomes perceptive enough to understand what strength alone cannot solve. Cinema rarely gives a young hero this kind of power. Her greatest act is not domination, it is recognition, and perhaps that is what Moana is really saying. We spend so much of life trying to prove who we are through achievement, obedience, usefulness, or admiration, but beneath all of that performance is a quieter question. What remains when no one is telling you who to be? Moana's answer is not a title. It is not a magical object. It is the capacity to listen, remember, choose, and return. She becomes a wayfinder not because the ocean gives her a path, but because she learns how to find one where none can be seen. To understand Thomas Kael's signature, begin with a paradox. He is a director of movement who is most interested in what movement reveals about people. Before Moana, Kyle built his reputation in theater. He directed In the Heights and Hamilton, then moved to television and live musical performance with projects such as Fozzie Verdon and Grease. Live, Moana became his feature film directorial debut, but it did not ask him to abandon the instincts formed in those earlier spaces. It asked him to translate them. The clearest of those instincts is his understanding of community. In the Heights, a neighborhood is not simply a location, it is a living, dramatic organism. Stories overlap, music travels between people, private dreams become inseparable from family obligations, and the fear of losing a place that shaped everyone inside it. Hamilton uses another word and musical language, but the same instinct remains. History is created through bodies moving together, witnesses reshaping events, and an ensemble turning personal ambition into collective memory. That sensibility fits Moana naturally. Motunui works best when Kel treats it not as scenery but as a community whose rhythm existed before the camera arrived. People build, weave, dance, teach, prepare food, and respond to the island together. Moana's departure matters because she is leaving human connection, not merely a beautiful location. Kill understands that an ensemble can reveal the emotional stakes of a protagonist. The village shows us what Moana loves, what she may inherit, and what could disappear if she fails. Every surrounding body adds weight to the small figure who eventually enters the ocean alone. His second signature is the belief that music is action. For Kale, a song is rarely decorative. It is a change in pressure. Characters sing when the emotion inside ordinary speech becomes impossible to contain. Movement, rhythm, and voice do not interrupt the story. They show the story becoming more honest. That is why Moana's musical sequences often begin in physical activity. Walk becomes rhythm. Paddling becomes rhythm. Repeated tasks become the structure through which a community expresses its values. Moana's songs move outward because her identity is reaching beyond the boundaries around her. Maui's music performs toward us because he turns insecurity into spectacle. Cale has spent much of his career collaborating with Lin-Manuel Miranda, from In the Heights and Hamilton to this version of Moana. That history explains his trust in musical storytelling and his comfort allowing language, percussion, gesture, and emotion to occupy the same moment. His third recalling instinct is more intimate. He is fascinated by the person behind the performance. Fosse Verdon examined artists whose public brilliance existed beside private damage. Hamilton is filled with people constructing the version of themselves history might remember. Even In the Heights follows characters deciding which parts of identity must be protected and which must change. Maui belongs directly inside that pattern. He is always performing a legend. His humor, strength, and self-celebration form a structure built around abandonment. Kale's camera becomes most expressive when it waits for that performance to weaken. The important moment is often not the joke or transformation, but the silence afterward, when Maui can no longer control what his space reveals. Moana performs in a quieter way. She tries to embody the certainty expected from a future chief, even when she cannot reconcile duty with the call of the ocean. Cale is drawn to the tension between the role a person occupies and the private self pressing against it. This makes Moana a continuation of a question he has asked for years. How do people author themselves while surrounded by histories, families, communities, and stories that have already assigned them a part? The film's answer is wayfinding. A wayfinder does not erase the world around her, she learns to lead it. She moves through inherited knowledge without allowing inheritance to become confinement. That connects to Kair's larger body of work, where identity is negotiated through community, memory, performance, and the stories others tell about us. Yet Moana also exposes the limits of his signature. Theater allows Kair to guide attention through bodies, light, and space, while the audience chooses where to look. A film camera chooses for us. Digital spectacle requires another kind of precision, and the adaptation is not always as fluid when emotion depends on effects rather than performers. The human scenes carries confidence. The largest fantasy sequences sometimes carry the caution of a director protecting an established blueprint. So this film is not the peak of Cale's artistic identity, it is a transition. It extends his interest in mythical communities, inherited stories, and people struggling beneath performed identities. But it places those instincts inside an industrial form demanding fidelity, scale, and technical control. At times, he finds a moving balance. At others, the machinery becomes more visible than the hand guiding it. Still, watching Moana teaches us something clear about how Cale sees the world. He believes people discover themselves in relation to others. He believes music reveals what conversation conceals. And he believes the most important change often occurs not when a person enters the spotlight, but when the identity they have been performing finally falls silent. That is the signature beneath the wave. And it becomes clearer when we return to the film knowing where the journey ends and begin noticing everything quietly preparing us for it. The first time you watch Moana, the horizon pulls your attention forward. You want to know whether she will cross the reef, whether Maui will help her, whether the heart can be returned, and whether the world waiting beyond Motunui will become more dangerous than the stories promised. The journey appears to be moving in a straight line toward restoration. The second time, the film begins moving backward as well. Once you understand where Moana's journey leads, the opening scenes no longer feel like simple preparation. They become a map of everything she will eventually need. The village teaches her responsibility, her father teaches her the cost of fear, Tala gives her memory, the ocean gives her uncertainty. Even before she steps into a boat, the person she will become is being assembled from lessons that initially appear to contradict one another. Chief Tui changes most immediately on rewatch. During a first viewing, his refusal to let Moana cross the reef can seem like the familiar obstacle placed before a young hero. He represents caution, authority, and the life she must move beyond. But once you understand the full emotional shape of the story, his behavior becomes sadder and more complicated. He is not merely protecting a role, he is protecting himself from experiencing another loss. Watch how quickly his concern becomes anger whenever the ocean enters the conversation. The intensity of his reaction reveals that the subject is never theoretical for him. He is not debating the future of the village. He is returning emotionally to the moment that convinced him the sea could not be trusted. That makes his scenes with Moana more painful. He believes he is teaching her leadership, yet his fear prevents him from seeing the form her leadership must take. The first time through, their disagreement creates tension. The second time, it becomes an example of how love can accidentally restrict the person it wants most desperately to protect. Gramma Tala also feels different once you know how little time she has. Her playfulness becomes more purposeful. Her refusal to behave as the village expects is not simply comic eccentricity. It is the kind of freedom she is quietly offering Moana. Tala has already accepted that belonging does not require obedience to every expectation. On rewatch, notice how often she watches Moana before speaking. She does not rush to tell her who she is. She waits for Moana's own questions to become strong enough to carry the answers. That patience is one of the story's most loving details. Tala understands that truth given too early can become another instruction. Truth discovered at the right moment becomes recognition. The hidden boards gain greater power as well. At first, they are an exciting revelation, physical proof that the island's history is larger than Moana has been told. On rewatch, they feel almost mournful. These vessels were made for movement, yet they have remained in darkness while an entire community forgot the knowledge they represent. The boats are not abandoned because the people stopped loving the ocean. They are abandoned because fear became stronger than memory. Every layer of dust carries the weight of a generation that accepted stillness without knowing why. When the past is finally revealed, the scene is not only about Moana discovering that her ancestors were voyagers. It is about realizing that a community can lose part of itself while sincerely believing it is preserving itself. Maui's early behavior also becomes easier to read. His introduction is constructed around confidence, comedy, and control. He tries to dominate every interaction before vulnerability has a chance to appear. During a first viewing, that energy functions mainly as entertainment and conflict. The second time, you begin seeing the panic beneath it. His obsession with admiration is present in every exaggerated gesture. He assumes that Moana must be impressed because he cannot imagine another safe relationship with another person. Grace is the language he understands. When she refuses to give it freely, he treats her as a problem. Mini Maui makes this internal struggle visible long before Maui admits anything. The tattoo often responds to choices the larger Maui wants to justify. It wants questions and expresses disappointment without needing words. On rewatch, these reactions become emotional clues. Maui's conscience has been present all along. He has simply spent centuries learning how to perform over it. His relationship with the hook changes too. At first, it appears to be a powerful object he needs for the mission. Later, its emotional function becomes impossible to ignore. Maui touches, protects, and speaks about it as if it contains his identity. His fear of losing it begins long before the damage becomes visible. The hook allows him to become anything. The tragedy is that he has never learned who he is without it. Moana's uncertainty is similarly present from the beginning. The film does not hide it, but the momentum of a first viewing can make us remember mainly her determination. Returning to the story reveals how often she looks toward others for confirmation. She watches Tala, she waits for the ocean, she challenges Maui to tell her that she belongs. Her confidence is not a steady flame. It flickers, disappears, and must be created again. That makes her eventual independence more meaningful. She does not simply discover that she was capable all along. She learns that capability is not a permanent feeling. It is the decision to act even after the feeling has left. The ocean's behavior gains another layer as well. What initially seems unpredictable begins to feel deeply restrained. It helps Moana reach the journey, but it rarely completes a meaningful choice for her. It places her back on the boat, it protects the heart, it redirects events at crucial moments. But it does not become her courage. That boundary is easy to miss during the adventure. On rewatch, it becomes one of the film's wisest patterns. Guidance is offered repeatedly, yet responsibility remains with Moana. Visual motifs also become clearer. Circular shapes appear throughout the story: the heart, the spiral imagery, the curves of waves, the opening of the hidden cave, and the movements through which characters return to places emotionally connected to their beginnings. These forms suggest that Moana's journey is not a straight escape from home. It is a cycle of departure, discovery, and return. She travels outward to understand what was already within her community. She enters the future by recovering the past. And she becomes herself not by cutting the line of inheritance but by repairing it. Does the film grow stronger on rewatch? Emotionally, yes. Its performances become more legible when the plot no longer demands all of our attention. Small expressions, pauses, and repeated images gain significance. The relationship between fear and love becomes richer, and the story's themes appear more carefully planted than they may seem at first. But the adaptation's limitations also become harder to ignore. Once surprise and spectacle have faded, its closeness to the animated film becomes even more obvious. The recreated structures offer fewer discoveries than the performances inside them, so the rewatch produces a divided result. The film itself may not transform dramatically, but the people within it become more human. You notice Moana listening before she leads. You notice Maui performing before he retreats. You notice Stella preparing to leave long before Moana is ready. And you notice that the final answer has been quietly reflected in the story's images from the very beginning. The first viewing follows the voyage. The second begins to understand the currents beneath it. No film begins at the edge of an empty ocean. Before Moana raises its sail, it carries decades of Disney storytelling, centuries of Pacific navigation, and a long cinematic fascination with characters who leave familiar land to discover who they are when every recognizable boundary disappears. The most immediate ancestor is, of course, the animated Moana from 2016. This live action version does not merely borrow its plot. It inherits its structure, songs, visual symbols, humor, and emotional rhythm. Thomas Kyle has described the new film as remaining faithful to the original while using real performers to create a different kind of emotional presence. That makes the relationship between the two films unusual. The animated version is not hidden source material waiting to be rediscovered. It stands openly beside the adaptation, almost like another performer sharing every scene. But the 2016 film was already part of an older Disney lineage. Its directors, Ron Clements and John Musker, had shaped films such as The Little Mermaid and Aladdin, stories about young people drawn toward worlds lying beyond the lives prepared for them. Ariel looks toward the human world. Aladdin imagines a life outside the identity society has assigned him. Moana looks beyond the reef, The resemblance is not simply that each character wants adventure. Each story begins with a boundary presented as natural and permanent. The hero eventually discovers that the boundary was constructed by fear, hierarchy, or incomplete understanding. Crossing it becomes an act of self-definition. Yet Moana also transforms that tradition. There is no romantic destination waiting across the ocean. Moana's identity is not completed by being chosen by another person. Her central relationship is with her people, her ancestry, the natural world, and the responsibility she gradually chooses for herself. When Clemens and Muska developed the animated story, they deliberately placed a young Polynesian wayfinder at its center rather than making Maui the protagonist, creating a coming-of-age adventure without conventional romance. That decision changed the familiar Disney journey. Moana does not travel toward a new kingdom where she will finally belong. She travels outward so that she can return home with a deeper understanding of where belonging came from. The story also participates in the tradition of ocean cinema, where open water removes the social world and leaves a character alone with skill, fear, memory, and survival. You can feel distant echoes of films such as Castaway, not because the stories share the same plot, but because the ocean transforms identity by stripping away ordinary systems of control. A Smithsonian examination of the original Moana also noted traces of Castaway, and Armstrong Spiley's seafaring novel, call it courage in its movement from fear toward navigational understanding. But Moana alters the usual isolation story by refusing to treat the ocean only as emptiness or hostility. The sea is dangerous, but it is also relationship, history, transportation, nourishment, and knowledge. Moana is not learning how to defeat the ocean, she is learning how to read it. That distinction comes from a much older inheritance than cinema. Traditional Pacific wayfinding used observations of stars, sunlight, swells, winds, birds, and other natural signs to navigate immense stretches of ocean without modern instruments. The films transform that knowledge into accessible adventure, but the central idea remains profound. Direction can come from sustained attention to relationships between the sky, water, and living world. This places Mona in conversation with films concerned with indigenous identity and the recovery of knowledge interrupted by fear or cultural displacement. Whale Rider is not a confirmed direct influence on Moana, but the thematic relationship is difficult to ignore. Both stories center a young Pacific Island girl whose ability to lead is initially misunderstood because the community's current expectations no longer contain the full truth of its own traditions. Both characters move forward not by rejecting ancestry, but by entering more deeply into it. The difference is one of cinematic language. Whale Rider finds myth within intimate realism. Moana moves through musical fantasy, comedy, gods, monsters, and the responsive ocean. One whispers where the other sings. Yet both ask whether tradition remains alive when it is merely repeated or only when a new generation is allowed to interpret it. The live-action film also belongs to Disney's recent history of remaking animation through physical performance and digital realism. That lineage includes films attempting to preserve recognizable stories while changing their visual form. Moana arrives after audiences have already learned the pleasures and limitations of that method. We know what realism can add: texture, human presence, cultural visibility, and the emotional vulnerability of a real face. We also know what it can take away: exaggeration, abstraction, visual freedom, and the sense that every element belongs naturally to the same imaginative world. This adaptation inherits that entire debate. Its most meaningful response is not found in its digital ocean or enormous creatures. It is found in the Pacific Islander performers, builders, dancers, craftspeople, navigators, and cultural practitioners whose physical presence changes who is allowed to embody a global myth. The film draws from a cinematic past that often transformed Pacific cultures into distant scenery. Here Pacific people occupy the center and help construct a world surrounding them. That does not remove every question of adaptation or cultural compression. Moana still blends traditions from across a vast and diverse region into a fictional world designed for global entertainment, but it enters a conversation earlier Hollywood films often failed even to recognize: the difference between using a culture as an image and involving its people as creators of the image. So the cinema before Moana is not one simple path. It includes Disney heroines crossing forbidden boundaries, musical characters singing identities they cannot yet speak, solitary voyagers tested by open water, indigenous stories about recovering interrupted knowledge, and generations of films that treated the Pacific as an exotic background rather than a living center. Moana inherits all of them. Its achievement is not that it escapes every influence. Art never does. Its deeper purpose is to take the familiar voyage outward and turn it toward another question: who has historically been allowed to tell stories about the ocean? And what changes when the people whose history lives within those waters finally stand at the center of the frame? That question prepares us for the moment when every symbol, wound, and hidden connection comes together. From here, there is no way forward without revealing exactly where the journey leads. From this moment, we go into full spoilers. If you have not yet seen this film, stop here. Go experience it first and come back. Some things deserve to be felt before they are understood. The story's final movement begins with failure. Moana and Maui have reached Te Fiti's island, but Teka stands between them and the place where the heart must be restored. Moana believes determination can carry them through. Maui understands that another direct attack may destroy his damaged hook, the object through which he has built nearly his entire sense of self. They try anyway. Teka's fire overwhelms them. Maui's hook cracks further, and the possibility of losing it becomes real. What follows is one of the story's most painful conflicts because neither character is entirely wrong. Moana sees Maui's departure as abandonment. She has trusted him, learned from him, and begun to believe they are completing this journey together. When he leaves, it confirms the fear she has carried since crossing the reef. Perhaps everyone who doubted her was right. Maui sees the situation differently. He has already lost the hook once. Without it, he believes he will lose not only his power but the identity that saved him after his human parents abandoned him. To continue feels less like courage and more like surrendering the last proof that he matters, so he flies away. The moment is devastating because Moana cannot defeat his fear by reminding him of the mission. Responsibility is not enough to make someone release the object they believe has kept them worthy of love. Alone on the ocean, Moana finally breaks. Until this point, every failure has been followed by another attempt. She has survived the reef, the storm, the Kakamora Tamatoa, Maui's resistance, and her own inexperience. But now persistence no longer feels heroic. It feels exhausting. She looks at the heart and asks the ocean to choose someone else. The ocean accepts this is important. It does not immediately reassure her. It does not insist that she is secretly powerful or remind her that destiny cannot be refused. The water takes the heart from her hands and allows her to surrender the role. For the first time, Moana is free from being chosen. That freedom reveals something she could not understand while she was trying to prove herself. If the ocean's decision is no longer binding her, then whatever she does next will belong entirely to her. Gramma Tala's spirit appears across the darkened water. The scene could have become a simple motivational return, but its emotional power comes from Tala's refusal to command. She does not shame Moana for failing. She does not say that the world depends upon her, or that she must continue because everyone at home is waiting. She gives Moana permission to return. That permission is the final gift. Moana has spent the journey treating departure as proof of courage. Tala reminds her that returning home would not erase what she has done. Love does not make her world dependent on completing the mission. And because Moana is finally allowed to stop, she can ask the question underneath every other question. Who is she when she is not trying to satisfy the ocean? Her father Maui, her village, or even Tala? The answer comes through memory. She is the daughter of people who crossed the sea. She is shaped by her parents, her grandmother, her island, and the generations whose knowledge was hidden but never completely lost. She is also the person who entered the ocean despite being afraid. None of those identities cancels the others. They gather inside her. Moana dives into the water, retrieves the heart, repairs the boat, and turns back toward Taka. This time she is not moving because the ocean selected her, she is moving because she has selected herself. That is the real transformation. A chosen hero follows destiny. A wayfinder chooses a direction. Maui eventually returns, but his return carries the same meaning. No magical force compels him. He comes back knowing that his hook may be destroyed. He has finally reached the point where responsibility matters more than preserving the performance through which he has defined himself. He confronts the current, creates an opening for Moana. The hook breaks. For centuries, Maui has believed that losing it would reduce him to nothing. Yet when it is destroyed, he does not disappear. He remains present, frightened and vulnerable, but still capable of making a meaningful choice. The film completes his emotional arc before Te Fiti ever restores the hook. Maui proves that he is more than his power, while believing the power is gone forever. Moana reaches the island's center and discovers that Te Fiti is missing. There is an empty shape where the goddess should be. Then she looks at the spiral on the heart. She looks at the matching form across Tika's chest. The truth becomes visible. Tika is not a monster guarding Te Fiti. Tika is Te Fiti. The creature they have treated as the obstacle is the wounded being they came to heal. This reveal has been hiding inside the story from the beginning. Maui did not merely steal an object belonging to Te Fiti. He removed something essential from her. Without the heart, creation becomes destruction. Fertility becomes fire. A life-giving presence becomes a force that attacks anything approaching the place where its wound began. Moana understands that fighting Taka will never restore balance. She asks the ocean to open a path. The water withdraws, leaving Moana standing alone before an approaching wall of fire. She does not raise a weapon. She does not command Taka to stop. She walks toward her, and then she recognizes her. This is the most important action in the film. Moana sees the pain beneath the thread. She understands that rage is not Taka's original identity, but the shape that unbearable loss has taken. Rather than reducing her to what she became after being wounded, Moana remembers who she was before the wound. Taika slows. The fire begins to settle. Moana presses her forehead against hers and returns the heart. Life moves outward. The hardened volcanic form falls away. Vegetation returns. The poisoned islands recover, and Te Fiti is restored. The world heals not because evil has been defeated, but because separation has been repaired. The live action adaptation preserves this essential resolution and the original journey's principal ending. Maui approaches Te Fiti without his hook. He apologizes. The apology matters because it arrives before he knows whether he will be rewarded. He is not bargaining for his power. He is finally acknowledging that his need for admiration caused harm no gift to humanity could justify. Te Fiti restores the hook anyway. She also repairs Moana's boat, not simply returning each traveler to who they were, but giving them the means to continue as the people they have become. Moana and Maui then say goodbye. This separation avoids turning their relationship into ownership. They do not need to remain together for their connection to matter. Maui has helped Moana become a wayfinder. Moana has helped Maui understand that he remains valuable without applause. Each can now continue without using the other as proof of identity. When Moana returns to Motunui, the emotional resolution is not that her father admits she was right and everything goes back to normal. Normal has become impossible. Her parents run toward her, and Chief Tui's response contains relief before authority. The daughter he attempted to protect has returned carrying the knowledge his fear had helped bury. Mona places a shell upon the stack of stones representing the island's chiefs. The gesture does not reject the leaders who came before her. It expands what leadership can mean. Stone represents the island's permanence. The shell carries the ocean. She belongs to both. The people uncover their voyaging boats and return to the sea. Moana leads them not away from home, but into a larger understanding of it. Motunui is no longer defined by staying in one place. Home becomes something they can carry across water through memory, skill, community, and shared direction. The final image completes the circle. Moana began as someone standing at the edge of the island, looking toward a horizon she was forbidden to cross. She ends on the ocean with her people behind her, no longer asking whether she is permitted to go. She knows how to lead them there. There is no conventional post-credit scene extending the plot or teasing another antagonist. Instead, the credits carry the new song along the way, bringing Catherine Laga Aya, Dwayne Johnson, and original Moana voice performer Alida Guardo together. The choice functions less like a franchise hook and more like a passing of the voyaging story between performers and generations. And that is why the ending still works even inside an adaptation so closely tied to an earlier film. The final victory belongs not to force, destiny, or spectacle. Mai Sarais losing the object he thought defined him. The Fiti is restored when someone recognizes the person beneath her anger. Chief Tui learns that protecting his daughter cannot mean limiting the person she is becoming. And Moana discovers that the voice guiding her was never only the ocean. It was memory, it was responsibility, it was grief transformed into direction. It was the part of herself that became audible only when every other voice fell away. What stayed with me was not the scale of the ocean or the spectacle of a world being restored. It was the moment Moana was allowed to stop. She had spent the entire journey moving because someone needed her, because her island was fading, because the ocean had chosen her, and because turning back seemed like proof that everyone who doubted her had been right. Then, at the point where she had nothing left to offer, Gramma Tala did not ask her to be stronger. She told her that she could go home. That kindness has not left me. We often imagine encouragement as a voice pushing us forward. Keep going. Do not quit. Prove that you can finish what you began. But sometimes love sounds different. Sometimes it says that your worth will remain even if you cannot complete the journey. And strangely, that freedom can become the reason you continue. Moana does not return to the mission because she is afraid of disappointing Tala. She returns because, for the first time, the decision is fully hers. The ocean's choice no longer defines her. The expectations of her village no longer define her. Even the heroic image she has been trying to live up to falls away. What remains is a young person listening to herself. I think that is why the story continues to matter, even when the form of this adaptation feels too familiar. Beneath the songs and mythology is an experience many people recognize, the moment when you realize that the life others prepared for you cannot answer every question inside you. That realization does not make your family wrong. It does not make home meaningless. It simply means that love cannot always tell you which direction to take. I would return to this film for the quieter performances, for the physical presence of Motunui, and for the way Catherine Laga Aya allows Moana's courage to remain imperfect. I would return for Tala, whose fate never becomes control. I would return for the image of the ocean opening before Moana as she walks towards something everyone else has understood only as a monster. Because recognition is the part that hurts most beautifully. Tika is not healed by being defeated. She is healed because someone finally sees that the anger is not the whole of her identity. The wound has changed her, but it has not erased who she was before it. There are people who will carry this story because they have also felt reduced to the most damaged version of themselves. There are others who will carry it because they know what it means to love a family and still need to cross a boundary that family cannot cross with them. And there are those who will recognize Maui's fear, the belief that without achievement, usefulness, or applause, there may be nothing left worth loving. The film offers all of them the same quiet possibility. You are more than the role you perform. You are more than the fear you inherited. You are more than the moment in which you failed. When the credits ended, I did not feel that I had discovered a new Moana story. I felt that I had watched an old truth move through new faces. Maybe that is not enough to justify every creative decision behind a film, but the truth itself remains powerful. We do not find our way because the ocean becomes predictable. We find it because somewhere between memory and uncertainty, we finally learn to trust the person holding the sail. Moana is most powerful when it stops trying to prove that the familiar can be made larger and begins asking whether the familiar can still feel human. As a live-action adaptation, it remains caught between sincerity and necessity. The care behind the production is visible in the casting, cultural collaboration, physical craftsmanship, music, and performances. Katwin Lagarde gives Moana a gentle uncertainty that helps the character feel newly inhabited rather than merely reconstructed. Rena Owen brings warmth and spiritual weight to Gramma Tala. Dwayne Johnson finds his strongest moments when Maui's performance of confidence begins to collapse and the frightened person underneath becomes visible. But the film rarely escapes the shape of what came before. Its loyalty preserves the emotional landmarks people love, yet that loyalty also limits surprise. Too often, the adaptation asks recognition to perform the work of discovery. A scene arrives, memory responds, and the new version does not always create enough distance to form an identity entirely its own. For some people, that will be the central disappointment. If you need an adaptation to challenge its source, reconsider its structure, or discover a dramatically different visual and emotional language, this version may feel too cautious. You may admire the performers and craftsmanship while still wondering why such a recent available and already effective animated film needed to be recreated so closely. But families, younger viewers, and people who simply want to experience the story through physical landscapes and Pacific Islander performers may connect with it more deeply. For them, familiarity may not feel like a limitation, it may feel like an invitation, and that difference matters. Not every film is experienced through the same demand. Some people enter looking for artistic transformation. Others enter hoping for communal joy, music, recognition, and the pleasure of seeing a beloved story embodied by real people. Moana can provide that pleasure, even when it struggles to provide a convincing new argument for itself. It is best experienced in a cinema where the ocean can fill your field of vision and the music can move to a room shared with other people. The scale gives the physical production its strongest advantage over watching at home. On streaming, the resemblance to the animated version may become more difficult to ignore because both films can sit only a few selections apart. Would I consider it something to own? That depends on whether this cast becomes your emotional connection to the story. The film is not essential as a replacement, but it may become meaningful as a companion. Another telling carried by different voices, bodies, and memories. My rating is 5.1 out of 10. That rating recognizes a film made with visible care, sincere cultural presence, and several moving performances, but restrained by its unwillingness to travel far enough beyond the reef of its own source material. Still, the story beneath the adaptation survives. It survives because Moana does not ask us to become fearless. It asks us to pay attention, to notice when inherited roots no longer protect the people they were created to save, to recognize that identity may contain both the home behind us and the horizon ahead, to understand that anger can be the surface of a wound and that restoration sometimes begins when someone is finally seen clearly. Perhaps that is why the final image remains moving in any form. A young wayfinder stands on the ocean, not because uncertainty has disappeared, but because she has learned that direction does not require certainty. The horizon has not moved closer. She has simply become ready to meet it. Thank you for spending this time with me and for allowing this conversation to move beyond the surface of the film. Stories like Moana become more interesting when we do not reduce them to whether they are faithful, beautiful, unnecessary, or successful. Cinema can be all of those things at once. Film can contain meaningful representation and cautious corporate strategy. It can create genuine emotion while borrowing the shape of an emotion already remembered. It can disappoint us as an adaptation and still reach us through one honest performance. That contradiction is worth discussing. Did this live action version give you a new emotional connection to Moana, or did it make you appreciate the animated film more? Do you think a faithful remake can justify itself through casting, cultural presence, and physical performance, or does it need to transform the story more radically? And which moment stayed with you most after the ocean became quiet? Share your thoughts in the comments. I would genuinely love to know whether you entered this film as someone returning to a story you already love or as someone discovering Moana for the first time. If this essay gave you another way to see the journey, you can support the Cineflux by liking the video and subscribing. It helps this space continue growing into a home for conversations about what films understand, what they leave unsaid, and why certain images remain inside us long after the screen goes dark. In the next video, we will step into another cinematic world and look beyond its story toward the fears, choices, and human truths moving beneath it. Until then, keep listening for the stories that call you beyond the familiar, and remember that finding your direction does not mean forgetting where you began. That is the Synflux. I will see you in the next one.